of the music department. He is not only a composer and a writer of songs, but he's a very fine poet. And he is going to be our reader today. My announcements always are, and I have to do this myself, silence your cell phones, please, so that they don't go off during your reading. And next week we have another fine poet, Lance Larson, on our faculty. He has a new book called Backyard Alchemy. It's a really fine book. And he's such a good poet. I'm sure you'll love to hear from him. So be here. We'd also like to announce that we're now taking applications for the advanced and graduate student reading. That reading is the last week of the semester. It's March 27th. And the deadline for those is March 17th. That if you're in a creative writing, an advanced creative writing class, you will get an application from your professor, or there are some right at the back of the hall, right by that door. They're bright pink. They're on hot pink paper, so you can locate them. I'd also like to announce that a poet she's Maori, she's from New Zealand, she's also LDS. She's a really fine poet, and she's going to be lecturing on literature and cultural identity, March 12th at 11 a.m. in B92 JFSB, and those flyers, little flyers, so that you can know about that, were also distributed. Her poetry has appeared in books and journals in the United States, New Zealand, India, and New Guinea. A new collection of her poetry, Into the Luminous Tide, Pacific Poems, will be published this March, so this month. So we'd encourage you to attend her reading as well, reading and lecture. Our invocation will be given by Jessica Starley, and then I will introduce Michael Hicks.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for the opportunity that we all have to come and attend this reading, and we're grateful for the time that Michael Hicks has taken out of his schedule to not only create great works, but to share them with us. And we're grateful for the opportunity that we have to come to these readings and to broaden our understanding of what literature is, and to be entertained and to learn. And we're so grateful for all the blessings that Thou hast given unto us, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
To begin with the scholarly information, Michael Hicks is a composer, performer, scholar, and poet. And he joined the BYU School of Music faculty in 1985. He's the author of 3 books, Mormonism and Music, A History, 60s Rock, Garage, Psychedelic, and Other Satisfactions, and Henry Cowell, Bohemian, all published by the University of Illinois Press, and he is currently co-authoring a 4th. His historical and analytical articles have appeared in many books and journals, such as Music Quarterly, Journal of the American Musicological Society, Perspectives of New Music, Journal of Aesthetic Education. He has twice won the ASCAP Deems Taylor Award for his writing about music, and currently edits the journal American Music. His poetry has been published in Dialogue, BYU Studies, Literature and Belief, Sunstone, and in the recent anthology, Cadence of Hooves, A Celebration of Horses. He's 5 times won first prize in the BYU Studies Poetry Competition, and in 2005 won 2nd place in the Utah Arts Council Original Writing Competition for his poetry. I came to know Michael as a member of my poetry group. But I'd like to talk about him first as a writer of great songs. Michael put out a CD, was it last fall? A couple of years ago. Wow, time flies. And it's such an excellent CD. I love intelligent music with lyrics that you like to listen to. Like, I really like Paul Simon songs. I really like Mary Chapin Carpenter. And I got Michael's CD, and I listened to it for like 3 months straight, every day, because the songs are so interesting and so well written. And he is able to, he uses all the skills of a poet to make his lyrics excellent. And he also uses the skills of a poet to make his poetry excellent. He uses rhetorical patterns. He's very aware of syntax. He writes dense poetry that you have to pay attention to and listen to. And he has these wonderful perspectives on experience. They're always new and insightful, and you'll always enjoy them. I forgot to mention that there will be a reception after the reading when you'll have a chance to talk with Michael Hicks more, and when we will have his CD available for you to purchase at a great discount compared to if you were to buy it in the bookstore. But first, we have the real opportunity to hear from someone who is, whose music is both in his poetry and in his music. So let's welcome Michael Hicks.
Thank you. I will often say to people when they ask if I'm a poet, I paraphrase Meg speaking to Henry VIII in Man for All Seasons when he asks if she's a scholar, and she says, among women I pass for one. And so when people ask if I'm a poet, I generally say among musicians I pass for one. And so I hope to live up to the invitation today, and I'm quite honored to be here. I always add the disclaimer too that there's another Michael Hicks who is known for writing for EFY, and that's not me actually, that's Michael R. Hicks. So if you want to hear about my arrangement of As Sisters in Zion and so forth, that's not me, so sorry. I begin with my own kind of invocation here. This is a poem called Day 7. Day 7. Who wouldn't get tired shoveling mountains into place, or plowing oceans with the tongue that spoke and split open the darkness like a coconut? Come, clamshells and salmon eggs, he called. Come, anemones and coral. Come, dolphins giggle and sheen of the blue whale's back, the volcanoes belch, sandbars and seaweed, foam singing in the pelican's wake. Come, thunder-hoofed caribou. Come, spittle of wolves and leopards. Come, iguanas tearing bushes, anacondas in drenched pits, the rhinoceros's moan, dung beetles and cola trees. Come, man and woman dredged from silt, stumbling the foothills, bone levers to hoist the beasts from soil, teeth to chew and swear, hair to clean, to pluck. Who wouldn't tire of piling igneous shelves or bundling storms, sowing black rain in onion fields, smell of wet ground rising in the pheasant's heartbreaking cry? Come, Maker, on this 7th day of your beautiful clutter, and climb a staircase of stars to your bed. Pull up the covers, ocean waves, wheat fields, lengthening shadows. I spend a lot of time writing poetry that's religious, and even though only this next one I think of as a religious poem, but this reading today, I was raised a Baptist and was a teenager in the Pentecostal church, and so even in writing non-religious poems, quote unquote, there are always going to be these elements of faithful language and I hope faithful thought that creep in. But this one is quite overt. That last one, Old Testament. This one, New Testament. I think that it's useful if you're writing from the Bible to envision new plots or new episodes, or in this case, a new speech, in the same way that you have so many different accounts and multiple versions of the life of Christ. This one called Jesus' Final Oration at the Last Supper, and I find the New Testament my favorite book of Scripture and also the most difficult because of Jesus, who is very, very difficult to know and understand the more you read of him. So this is Jesus' final oration at the Last Supper. You interpret my clenched jaw into geometry, an angle leaned into stars, a law for accidents, not me. Truth is, you know me less than you know the sea, coral-hearted, strung with weed and nets, fish blossoming, caught, gutted, salt drying in your fingernails. That's the truth, confess. But I am vaguer than your sails. I am off course, broken compassed, adrift on cures and indiscretion. Turn right, I'm there. Turn left, still there. An obsession, like trying to strap a harness to a cloud. So just believe in me as you believe in paintings, oiled cloth, fraying weave, poses tightening around a table like this one, corners chipped, backlit as though it were a question. Then interpret. Survey the scene, its damage and its joy. Observe what's lost in perspective, the rage staining my lips, the blast of ocean hitting land, the moon still vivid in blue sky, floating stone resonant with the cry of doves and anxious lambs, wine dripping on the bottle's neck, that line of ants who lift some crumbs, trudge to their hole, come back. One of my students, when I announced this reading, he said, so is this poetry that rhymes or is it that sensitive stuff? and I don't know if you noticed that rhymed all the way through. Sometimes slant rhymes, and I hope you did notice, because for you not to notice is my job. This next poem, called The Question of Remarkability, and I want to say something about that title in a minute. This talks about something that I never really talk about. This is that horse's poem, and it's not a typical theme of mine, but it ended up in this poem, The Question of Remarkability. In the middle of the 20th century, in the middle of the highway, from Fresno to Chowchilla, through fields cut and bundled like farm girls' hair in summer, up the porched shade banks of a pass that divides federal land from big ranches, a 46 Ford pickup pulls one horse in a slant-load trailer. His head hangs out the window, a whole room for a harness, swaying like a ballad at each turn. He keeps still as foothills gallop across his eyes. He grazes on wind, a wheeled gallery, more statue than animal, more noun than verb. And as the truck leans inland, the pastures study this parody of the Pony Express. All this could be a painting, but you would lose the nuance of pavement. Or it could even be a sonata, but you might miss the scruff of mane up the middle of his sloping back. For some scenarios, words work best, or simply to have been there, whichever lasts longer. This title came about because this was originally called Horse Trailer, which makes sense. And in our reading group, Lance asked, well, why this horse trailer? What is remarkable about this incident or this image? Think about that and see if you can get that into the poem. And I thought about it for a long time, and there was kind of a deadline for submission, and so I thought, I'm just retitling it The Question of Remarkability. And sometimes that's what you have to do, is try to figure it out, or at least allude to the question in the title itself. I always perk up in sacrament meetings when they talk about records. And because I always hear that through my own filter, which is the records, like I have 6,000 LPs up on the shelves upstairs. And so, and when I read the scripture about let a record be kept, I thought, why, I keep them all. You know? So this poem gets into that culture that I'm very much a part of record collecting. And well, this poem called Wailing, W-H-A-L-I-N-G. Wailing. After ham baguettes and Martinelli's at the Museum Cafe, my new friend Gary drove me to see the 9,000 LPs stored above his garage, all plastic-sleeved, cube-shelved onto 3 walls, a mausoleum of tunes, souls of our heroes floating in mildew air beside the last unshelved wall, which wore a poster of the pyramids at Giza, the insert for Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, a first pressing of which Gary held up, sliding the vinyl from its sleeve as if to illustrate the title, and declared, "Stone Mint." I said, "I hear it's going to be repressed," to which he said, "Aren't we all?" As if he were lifting a tone arm, as if a pun could retract the sorrow of record hounds everywhere for their black fetish's erosion, its extinction by neglect. Each new pressing means preservation, I told Gary, mummification and resurrection at once, what high priests tried in pyramids, which, like any collection, one keeps excavating and refilling. Gary said he wanted to reorganize by genres with cardstock slats for dividers. "Where would you put Songs of the Humpback Whale?" he asked. "Start a whales section," he said, as if I were some new enlightenment stumbling into the room. Crumb's Vox Balaenae, Hove Hannes's and God Created Great Whales, maybe some Paul Horn. Hendrix belongs there, he said. The feedback is pure whale. So we talked for hours about the ecology of rhyme, and about memories tilting architecture, and about how whales can hear each other's songs 1,000 miles away, one ocean to the next, which led us to our various ex-lives, most now capsized or collapsed like waves. And soon it got dark, though we knew the physics of planetary surfaces, and knew that it's always day somewhere on Earth, that even as we spoke, a sunlit Giza was tipping its worn styluses onto heaven to play the B-side. One task that I have in the songs on this CD, Valentine Street, is to write love songs, but love poetry is very difficult because you don't want to actually come out and say it, I guess. You want to tell the truth, but tell it slant, as Emily Dickinson would say. And I love the song Losing My Religion by R.E.M., in which he keeps saying, oh no, I've said too much, and he's hardly said anything. He says, I set it up. And so, and yet I write a lot of what I think of as love poetry, and I'll read you a couple of love poems that kind of are slanted in a way. This one called Ramblin' Jack at the Bitter End, and I don't know if you know the Bitter End, the name of a club in Greenwich Village, a sort of old folk cafe. And Ramblin' Jack is Ramblin' Jack Elliott, who was a protege, you might say, of Woody Guthrie, and a friend to Bob Dylan and others of that generation. This is not a love song to Ramblin' Jack, I should mention, but he plays a part in this. Ramblin' Jack at the Bitter End. We were riding a train to Washington Square when she said to me, I wish the subway ran deeper underground. Why? Because when it comes into the station lights, I want epiphany, not just glare. And I said, the subway isn't a metaphor. That's actually how we talked back then. Especially on the train, or when walking on a drizzly sidewalk, hurrying up 14th Street through the village to the bitter end to hear Ramblin' Jack, a cowboy Jew from Brooklyn with a long-tailed voice that was weak and nasal, but still dragged you into nothing you'd prepared for. Once, I was tuning her guitar at a bus stop in Santa Cruz and saw our initials carved in the bench. Deep, totemic, as though some vandal had predicted we'd find them and run our fingers through the grooves like a relic. The world is full of seers, I thought. Some of them thugs, some of them cowboys, because everyone knows it's guns or guitars. You push yourself out of your childhood and into the street with your pocket vocabulary, your eyes squinting like knives. You try to cut through traffic and make a noise no one's heard, or a glare your lover will be proud of. So I know she was right about the subway. And I know that Ramblin' Jack was right too, when he sang for the 10,000th time about how happy he is walking with his baby by the San Francisco Bay, which we got to hear again at the bitter end. On the ride home from which, we leaned our heads back on the dirty subway windows and studied our reflections on the opposite side. The dark swelling up in them, the night engorged like the San Francisco Bay where we'd spent the last song of the night. Words floating like rafts in Jack's voice. It seemed we could ride them out onto the Atlantic till it turned into Pacific, and my terror of ever being without her would stay camped on the shore. Our blood weight shifted as we slowed into the 49th Street station and the bright lights underground. Well, that's kind of a specific love poem. This next one is a sort of general one, which has the generic title, Love Song. And maybe more obscure than the last one, I don't know. But try this out, Love Song. 1 minute I'm pulling my red Ford Taurus into the safety inspection bay at Lube Dock. The next I'm in the lobby rereading the Grand Inquisitor in Karamazov, translating this confluence into a mental lecture on how freedom and safety get folded into each choice like a wallet. The radio behind the counter pumps out Chuck Berry, No Particular Place to Go, while a t-shirted high schooler beside me bounces his leg religiously, as if patron saint of the reflexes that split the world into moments, the watch's indifferent faithfulness, the safety inspector's eyes switching from seatbelts to turn signals. But praise the shapeliness of the red Taurus, named for the marriage of a bull and a constellation. Or praise the steadier marriages of these magazine titles, Car and Driver, or Field and Stream, neatly landscaped on the glass table, all coffee-ringed and speckled with donut crumbs. The way the whole universe's windshield is flecked with reconsiderations. And this lobby glass shines everywhere. Framed awards and licenses, candy, Coke, and cigarette machines. The clear double doors swinging onto the garage, then hissing shut. 1 minute, I'm signing a receipt. The next, drifting into traffic, eyeing bumpers, and trying to merge at safe distances. My colleagues here, especially Lance, tend to write about their children a fair amount. I always feel guilty that I don't. And maybe I started writing a little bit too late to write about those young moments in your children's lives. Although I was writing poetry to some extent even back in junior high. 8th grade, Mr. Ganella, our teacher of English, and it was the era of anti-Vietnam protests, and I remember my first poem beginning, "Bombs are bad, they make us sad, they hit your head and make you dead." And Mr. Ganella saying, "Oh, that's so perfect. It's direct. It's real." You know, so he was very encouraging and appreciative. That was the civil rights era too, and he had us reading a lot. And I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, A Man-Child in the Promised Land, and Black Like Me, and the book Nigger, and The Shadow That Scares Me, and so on. All those great books in that era. And only later really got into some serious poetry, and this one poem, one of the very few that has any reference to my children in it. But it has the title Museum of Ancient Life, which you may know as the title of a building, a great museum at Thanksgiving Point. I think this title is not to suggest that building only. But I thank the proprietors of the building for the title. Museum of Ancient Life. A leaf grins in a rock's face, as if concealing secrets. The quiet of tree hardening to stone, or amber cupping light, careful as water in a child's hands. The shelves of debris proceed by age, Pleistocene, Eocene, Paleocene, a glass geometry cooled by the fluorescent hum of the Ice Age. Beside them, a version of a bird leans from his pedestal, wings canopied as if caught in the updraft of the past tense. As we walk the gallery, I'm holding my son's hand the way hominids do in this mural of a family crossing the Bering Straits, trudging from one era to the next on the complicitous ocean. They totter on feet still learning to bear the upright beast all the way to this place, where today my boy ascends the carpet slope toward a forest of bones with wonder still blowing through them. Here, where unpronounceable names struggle to survive. Where could Eden ever have been but here, with no map but ourselves? Here, where the only cost of remembrance is death. I have another rhyming poem for you here that I'm pointing out to you, slant rhymes all the way through, in hopes that you won't notice that. But my having said so, this has a kind of a strange title, I suppose, The Apotheosis of Fay Ray. And this comes from an experience of going to the Forever Hollywood Cemetery, which is quite an amazing place that's detailed in a beautiful way in a movie called The Young and the Dead, about these young people who got together, saw this great old Hollywood cemetery was for sale for a pittance, and they bought it, all these graves, and have turned it into quite a going concern again. And so there are many great old stars who are buried there, but new ones as well are starting to buy plots. And the week that we were in Los Angeles and we took a visit over there, Fay Ray had passed away. Fay Ray, the starlet of the movie King Kong. And I had grown up a great lover of the classic monster movies, which I saw only on television at the time. So I knew that movie pretty well, and she was a bit of an icon, I'd say, in my life. And so this poem just sort of came out later. The Apotheosis of Fay Ray. Each stone the shape of Kansas, nuzzled by grass, flat, grooved with names, dull, water-stained, a catalog, disease, accident, poisoning, a glint of each troubled star, that metaphor for what they were, their sparks flittering, lawn sprinkler wet, not one blessed thing between them and whatever eternity one flies to from here. I see only a few names I, who learned them only televised, can recognize. Tyrone Power, Nelson Eddy, Jane Mansfield, John Huston, Hattie McDaniel. A handful more, and one new layer of fresh-cut sod, sloped corners, a plastic flower, Fay Ray, who twisted in King Kong's shaggy paw, and whose name rang through theaters just for that. Screams, peeling dress, crimes of bestiality and greed tied up with the lines, "It wasn't the airplanes, it was beauty killed the beast," which was a moral I first trusted as a boy for its finality, its witty lesson, fairy tale trumping science, blunt as Kong's feet trampling witch-doctored jungles and then the sidewalks of New York, angles pointing in every direction as these stones do, each a fraction of a map. $5 in the gift shop, a flap, a folding script, an epitaph in the form of stutters, this whiff of the Atlantic, shadowed by the Empire State Building, where tonight Fay Ray's inheritance circles like twin-engine planes above the observation deck as tourists mount binoculared turrets aimed at liberty, stoned giantess representing us. From Midtown, she seems, for a moment, a monument to an actress, a movie, i.e. dream, some figment of time, an empty torch, and darkness just beyond reach. I'm going to read you one more poem, then I'll sing you a song, and then a final poem as a benediction. As a teacher, I end up writing songs about being a teacher and poems about being a teacher. And I teach an aesthetics class here. And this sort of comes out of that. I may even have, I know I've got a couple of former aesthetics students here. Well, here's an homage to that class. Aesthetics class as the last subject. In this seminar, each hour is a renunciation. Students open their readings like hands in the Da Vinci. So many questions pose in their faces. The Old Testament of high school drifting off like fishing boats. We sit all the way around the long table by a window, though Da Vinci painted all his figures on only one side, like the melancholy of true belief or the inequity of prayer. Today's topic is the institutional theory of art, which is this: an artifact only becomes art when the art world confers that status. That conferral is the only necessary and sufficient condition of art. Difficult to swallow, like baked crust. But no one chokes, or throws it back, because they all feel they need a teacher. And I've come to train them from their belief that the skin of art is pleasure, or its bones poverty. I write on the blackboard, and they tap their fingers on laptops, distilling words into a rainfall that is both longing and fulfillment at once. Later, we'll walk to our separate parking lots, cars basking in the leftovers of Mediterranean sunlight. But we'll remember certain moments scattered like crumbs throughout the room. Moments when we believed our little thoughts were stars pricking through a black canopy. Stars we thought we could sail by to some new home, a city both necessary and sufficient. Next week, I'll teach them about how master painters of the Renaissance used a camera obscura to project a clean image onto the canvas, an image they would have to trace, obedient to every detail, though the picture was upside down. That one flaw they could easily fix later. Now, this song is a radical shift in tone. And I'm playing it specifically because the director of the School of Music said he would come to this meeting today if I played this song, a favorite of his. I wrote this song for a roast of Hugh Nibley in 2002. And he was being roasted in the typical way by family members and friends. This was hosted by the Sunstone Symposium, and they asked if I'd write a song for it. I said, sure, I'd be happy to. I was a great fan of Hugh Nibley and anxious to perpetuate his legend in whatever ways I could. He, of course, feigned sickness and did not show up that night when it turned out. But the song remains, and so I'll play it for you. I don't have a name for it. It's just called Hugh Nibley. We'll see if this works. When Hugh Nibley was a baby, his parents thought maybe he'd get an education one fine day. But soon he demonstrated his brain was so dilated that he could have been Einstein's protege. So here's to Brother Nibley, the ography to Bibly, who's given us a schooling of his own. His books could fill a wagon, and so our shelves are sagging with the weight of everything he's ever known. He's detailed the creation and the progress of God's nation from the fall to Zion in the latter days. Adam, Enoch, Abraham, and Lehi, Mormon, Temples, Mammon, Brigham, BYU, and even the Sunstone craze. So here's to Brother Nibley. His thoughts are sometimes scribbly. There's something like a roadmap to the moon. But take some lines at random, and once you understand them, you'll find they're so much better than this tune. Sometimes he gets in trouble for bursting Mormon bubbles with the teachings of people like Joseph Smith. But the color of his language won't show one trace of anguish for all he makes the brethren put up with. So here's to Brother Nibley. I don't mean to be quibbly, but he's the funnest writer in this room. He improvises phrases with a wit that still amazes and a sarcasm that makes the righteous fume. Now his days are golden, his legacy's unfolding. The final chapter proofs are on their way. But if you know this scholar, you'll bet your last vain dollar he won't go gentle into that good day. So here's to Brother Nibley, who taught us all so glibly the weight of everything that we pursue. There's no way to repay him, but this whole song I'm playing is just my way of saying I owe you. That song is not on, nor does it bear any resemblance to the songs on the CD Valentine Street. I haven't, well, it's now been recorded, and it's on anyway, I have an old demo of it. You're welcome to give me a copy. All right, well, I'm going to close with my own poem called Benediction. Why do you read this, these veins trickling through a leaf, when outside the aspens fling confetti over the creek bank as if showering a parade of returning heroes? Why do you brush through this moss spreading on a page when outside a spattered cat crouches in the ivy, eyes fixed on a blur of hummingbird, that intuition of the vision behind everything in this unreadable world? Across the creek, a dog chants his meager alphabet at a dragonfly streaking the bare sunlight, freer than the ink leaking from my pen. I am not so didactic as the world itself, which pulls your collar to its face to say that God still talks in his small, confusing voice, teasing you from the poem back to the pond, where skeeters flit all day, as if to prove that insignificance walks on water too.
We have about 5 minutes for questions. So if you have questions, I'm sure Michael Hicks would love to answer them.
That's one of us. Oh, I see.
How do you feel like your background in music has influenced your poetry?
I don't know if you heard the question, how do you feel that your background in music has influenced your poetry, is that right? I think because it's all composition. To me, I mean, that's what I've always been involved with, is putting sounds together. And it's funny, when I'm over in the Joseph F. Smith building, if I say to someone I teach composition, they think it's English composition. And when I'm in the School of Music, of course, it's musical composition. To me, it's all composition. But I do think it's about sounds and how they collide. And of course, with English poetry, which is the only kind of poetry I know, it's the sounds as they collide and resonate, but also the meanings that are embedded within them, doing that in a sort of molecular way. And that's what music is molecules colliding in interesting ways in the air. So it's all sort of the same. There was another hand back. Yes, sir. Lance.
To what degree are your poems relying on primary experience? To what degree are they intertextual?
The question, I don't know if you could hear it, to what degree my poems rely on direct experience, to what degree intertextual. I don't even know what intertextual means exactly, so.
One text, one text.
Oh. I think they're both. It definitely varies from poem to poem, and you can hear even in the nature of the language of its relaxation or compression from one to the next, that there are different realizations, if not necessarily different origins. But I think that they come from different places. I guess that's the way it should be. So to what degree they're one or the other, I can't say, except it will certainly vary from one to the other.
Okay,
Thank you.
well, thank you again. And don't forget to pick up the applications for the reading series for the student, advanced or graduate students, and come with us to the reception where maybe Mike will play another song.